Shalom, shalom, shalom. How you doing, everybody? Welcome back to Reading with SHILO, man. Next edition. In the Reading with SHILO selection, we are jumping into chapter 8. Chapter 8 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins, man. We're jumping right into it. We are halfway through the book. I'm glad we finally here. We finally made it to this point, the halfway point, which might be a little bit over the half, but hey, man, it's all downhill from this point. It's an all downhill battle with the reading from this point. So we are in section 2 of the book, or part 3. Part 3 of the book. Part 3, the real side, invisible lives and clandestine humor. Chapter 8, race records, black films, sounds, and visions in black and blue. That's where we are right now, man. So, we are going to do section 1, just section 1. It's not going to be about 45-minute read. A 45-minute read. Section 2 is what's going to be. Section 2 going to be that. Because section 2. Oh, shit. Yeah, that's all section 2 right there. Section 1, section 2. Look how big that is. Look how much. Section 2 gonna hit us. Section 2 gonna have to be by the section 2. I might break section 2 down into 2 parts. Section 2, part 1 and part 2. We'll see, man. It might just be a 2-hour, another almost 2-hour read, all them pages just to get through it. But section 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.5 pages. So we can get it. So without further ado, make sure I got everything I need right here. Hey, if you're new to the page, welcome. Hey, if there's any words that I feel like I'm stumbling over, I'm gonna stumble over, I'm gonna look up the words. If it's some words I don't know, they catch me kind of off guard or whatever, I'm going to look them up. So, so have a seat, take your time and get ready. Hopefully we don't come across too many words, but if we do, man, I will take the time. And if you can't be patient, then I don't know what to tell you, straight up. But yeah, let's get chapter 8 started. Chapter 8. Race records, black films, sounds and visions in black and blue. For 30 years, independent black filmmakers had kept before the black people of America a vision of dignity and reality, sometimes tinged with humor, which, while often technically poor, was normally or never seen in Hollywood films. James Moray. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I like your mama, but she's got too many men. Ashes to ashes, now it's sand to sand. Every time I see her, she's got a brand new man. Speckle red. There are fun things to express the mood of the Negro better than his humor, unlike his music. There are a few things which has been able to break out and move freely throughout most of the societies of the world. Negro humor has stayed home, and through generations of fermentation, it has become a heady wine, rarely tasted by the outside world. For the most part, America has seen only a caricature of our humor. Sidney Poitier. Man. So look, before I do that, this is what I'm gonna do. Because I don't have no water. So we're about to start section 1. So I'm gonna pause for the calls right there. And I'm gonna go grab me a bottle of water right quick. All right, man. I got my ice, my water. Yes, before we start section 1. All right. All right, let's get it. Section 1. Section 1 of chapter 8. Shalom, whoever you are. Welcome. Come on in. Let's begin. Around the turn of the century, it became more and more apparent that whites and blacks in America's race-conscious society often preferred different types of entertainment and responded differently to what was presented on the stage and later in motion pictures. Since public facilities were usually segregated, this disparity was generally not a problem. Performers in the theaters and road shows of the period most often played before audiences of their own race. When shows or movies were presented before mixed crowds, however, some conflicts ensued. John Johnson, for instance, echoed the old laughing barrel tale when he recalled that during the 20s, blacks seated in the balcony of a movie theater were often warned about laughing. You niggas cut out that laughing, unless whites seated in the orchestra laughed first. If merely for the sake of a more harmonious audience response, the idea was distinctly separate entertainment fare for blacks and whites began to loom as a plausible alternative in the minds of both races. African Americans had an additional incentive, the opportunity to correct some of the distorted images of themselves as early as 1909. Efforts to effect an entertainment policy reflected the nation's separate but equal racial agenda had begun. The first organized theatrical circuit for black performers was formed that year. Soon, before swarthy crowds are traveling tent shows, carnivals, and circuses, the tactically held but rigidly enforced restrictions on blacks' performances were starting to be relaxed. Performers could more easily be themselves, and the dynamic created between audience and entertainer allowed for the change in attitude and expressive focus. Although the alternation may have been imperceptible to non-blacks or even to the few mid-class Negroes who may have errantly wandered into these shows, the pauses, sly winks, and shifts in emphasis insinuated into ritual minstrel buffoonery at those times represented the rudimentary phase of a more genuine form of black entertainment on stage. A few years later, Bill Foster is said to have made the first black produced movie. And in 1916, largely in reference to Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, the first film company dedicated to producing films for blacks was founded in Los Angeles. In 1921, a line of phonograph records featuring music thought to appeal primarily to African Americans, was introduced by OK Records. The next year, the Black Swan Company, named after America's first black circuit singer, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, was founded by Harry Pace, who had previously started a music publishing company with W.C. Handy. It was the first black-owned recording company in America. Each of these enterprises provided entertainment that could be viewed or listened to in all black settings, whether in the theater or at home, where the distorting shadow of white interpretation was not a significant influence. Moreover, these outlets for humorous expressions were more pointedly aimed to the black sensibility. Still, the various reasons, among them the overriding fact that the production process nearly always involved non-blacks, race records, and black films had less direct influence on the evolution of African American humor than did stage performers. Comedy, of course, was never the central focus of the record industry. It was always something of a novelty, an adjunct to music, perhaps as a reaction to the saccharine ballads and waltzes that flourished prior to the gay 90s. However, the popular music lyrics of the early 20th century often took a humorous turn. Most cakewalks and coon songs, for instance, were characterized as much as by their intended humorous lyrics as by their slightly syncopatic beats. But the coon songs discussed earlier presented the most uninhibited display of decisive racial humor ever seen in America's popular music. In sheet music and some early recordings, according to Sam Dennison, these songs traded on stereotypes that were the culminating point in the development of types known to songwriters for years, and represented a point beyond which songwriters could not go without sinking to the level of invective known only to radical hate mongers. With rare exceptions, such as songs from black musicals by Bert Williams and George Walker, spirituals by the Fisk Jubilee Quartet, popular songs and rags by Noble Sissle and Ibu or Ubi Blank, or the bands of W.C. Handy and James Europe, African Americans were excluded from the record publishing field until the 20s. At that point, coon songs had diminished in popularity. Still, some songs of the genre, when released on race labels, were released on race labels. As late as 1927, for instance, bluesman Luke Jordan recorded Travel Coon for Victor. Folks, let me tell you about a traveling coon. His home was down in Tennessee. He made his living stealing people's chickens and everything he seen. Police got straight behind this coon and certainly made him take the road. There was never a passenger train so fast that Shine didn't get on board. This song was not typical of race label releases. However, generally, although many coon-like tunes were recorded, they appeared with slightly altered lyrics and reflected the performer's knack of transforming material to suit the taste of their audiences. Record company owners were perceptive enough to realize that most of the blatantly insulting songs that had been marketed for white consumption would not prove particularly appealing to black patrons. Even so, some of the records released were considered offensive as late as the 60s. The first company to release recordings explicitly aimed at black audiences was OK, which formally instituted its original race records in 1921. Largely, though, the persuasive efforts of Perry Bradford, a young black musician who conceived the blues songs were marketable, OK had also released the first documented recording of the black female singer Mamie Smith in 1920. And the same year had released Smith's Crazy Blues, the first blues song recorded. Smith's success opened the way for other black musical performers. Popular stage entertainers of the period were the first to be recorded, and with Bradford's assistance as musical director, many blues and jazz artists were recruited. Mamie Smith was joined by singers and musicians such as Louis Armstrong, King Oliver, Lonnie Johnson, and Sippy Wallace on the OK label. The success of the OK series prompted others to test the race record market, and within the next few years, Columbia, Paramount, Emerson, Pathé, Victor, and Black Swan initiated race labels. These labels introduced stars such as Bessie Smith, Fletcher Henderson, Ethel Waters, Alberta Hunter, Blind Lemon Jefferson, and Ida Cox. At first, vaudeville blues songs formed the largest class of the race records issued, but the industry quickly expanded and by the mid 20s offered a wide variety of entertainment. Music, of course, predominated, but as one historian noted, the diversity of singers, entertainers, jazz bands, preachers, and other black artists represented on these labels were remarkable. Such division as vocal blues, hot dance, sermons, and novelties were established and included in catalogs. Black Swan attempted upgrading its releases by including numbers of high standing and announced the first grand open opera record ever made by a color singer in 1922. This wide variety of recordings also included a rich sampling of the humor of the period. Some vaudeville performers recorded humorous songs from their stage repertoires. Butterbeans and Susie, a duo that combined song and dance with comedy, for example, released a number of tunes based on routines that burlesque marital relationships and combined biting quips from the spouses with standard blues lyrics. Their OK records, now collector's items, include Construction Game and A Married Man's a Fool If He Thinks His Wife Don't Love Nobody But Him. Other blues and novelty performers contributed tunes that reflected the merger of coon songs, which had been recorded by white artists prior to race records, with a newly discovered urban and rural blues. Many of these songs ridicule the popular denigrative images of blacks in the former by either altering the textual meaning of the established myths, such as the love of chicken or furtively inserting complaints about inequality in seemingly innocuous comic references. For instance, in A Chicken Can Waltz the Gravy Around, OK in 1927 by Sam Jones, or Stovepipe Number One, as he called himself, the appetite for chicken was changed metaphorically to a lust for a woman. Oh chicken, you can fry 'em nice and brown. Oh chicken, you can waltz that gravy around. Oh chicken, I don't mean no fault in that. Fine chicken grows in this town, and they wings can't get too fat. Oh, when I come to this neighborhood, chicken knows just what I mean. Chicken skipping and dodging, no chicken can be seen. And Bo Chapman's Good Old Turnip Greens, Brunswick 1928, manages to add a touch of social realism to a comic ditty about soul food. White man goes to college, and the Negro to the fields. The white man will learn to read and write, and the Negro will learn to steal. Oh, the white folks in their parlors, just eating their cakes and cream, but the dark is back in the kitchen, just a scratching on a turnip greens. As Paul Oliver points out this in Songster and Saints, vocal traditions on race records, overt comments on relations between the races were rare, and if there were many such songs, they scarcely got onto record. Black musicians and singers might play the nigger and satisfy the audience's delight in the chicken stealing black simpleton, while performing for white crowds. But to a black audience, he could lay more emphasis on the harassment by police or the successful duping of white people. There is little doubt that black listeners who purchased the above records, particularly those who had seen the songs performed in person, were aware of their covert implications. Race records provided numerous examples of this type of hedged wit and indirect protest. Much of the center, uh, much of the center on animal allegory in which the monkey and the rabbit were cast as wily black heroes, facing white adversaries such as the baboon or mule. Still, simple, simple by virtue of being removed from the immediacy of subtle physical gestures that inevitably altered the meaning of live performances on stage. Race records could not fully capture the intended spirit and oblique humor of black songs. In the early stages, besides providing outlets for jazz and blues artists, they most emphatically conveyed the suggestive sexual innuendo or blues overtones of the comic element of black songs. More satirical social humor, which surfaced when roadshow performers were faced with all black audiences, was largely avoided. This is not to suggest that blues lyrics were obviously or exclusively concerned with social strictures. This is not to suggest that blues lyrics were obviously or exclusively concerned with social strictures initiated by whites, even when they were performed before all black audiences. The blues are immortal, as one critic suggests, not because their lyrics content sometimes reflects problems produced by a social cultural order out of tune with the universe, but because their portrayal of life without facet enables the audience to identify with content and mood. On an honest personal level, although the raft of blues tunes released on race records often express disenchantment with social conditions in a humorous vein, to a large extent the activities of whites were incidental. The songs most often focused on the anti-racial, day-to-day lives of blacks. And while the blues was never specifically a comic form, it was no stranger to irony and satire. The expressive focus was usually financial or marital woes, social injustices, or the perfidies of sexual relationships and friendships, but woven throughout the typical earthy, candid lyrics were examples of wit and amusing observations lifted directly from the underground reservoir of black folk humor. As Albert Murray writes in Stomping the Blues, even when blues lyrics are about the most harrowing anxieties, hardships, and misfortunes, as they so often but by no means always are, blues music is no less appropriate to good time situations. And besides, sometimes the lyrics mock and signify even as they pretend to weep. Indeed, the blues is not only an expression of anguish and misfortune, but also a vehicle for transcending and overcoming despair. The spurning lover who is treated so coldly in Going to Chicago, for instance, finally announces, "Going to Chicago. Sorry, but I can't take you. So nothing in Chicago that a monkey woman can do." Blues songs often commented just as ironically on mainstream bigotry. "They arrest me for murder. I ain't never harmed a man. A woman hollered murder and I ain't raised my hand. Judge, the people are hollering about what in the world they will do. Lots of people had justice. They'd be in the penitentiary too." Or sometimes, directly mirroring the African practice of ridiculing in song, they would get down and dirty and zero in on another's heritage, behavior, or appearance. "I like your mama. I like your sister too. I did like your daddy, but your daddy won't do. I met your daddy on the corner the other day. You know about what that he was funny that way. Or now, boys, say you ain't acting fair. You know about that you got real bad hair. Your face is all hid now, your back's all bare. If you ain't done the bobo, what's your head doing down there? In terms of humor, then these records represented a kind of twilight zone between blacks' private and public postures. Knowing that their audience would be primarily black, performers could and did loosen many of their inhibitions, at least partially. They were able to abandon the pretense of coming dark or acting out white fantasy and occasionally display some of the doubterer examples of authentic black humor that were seldom found in Hollywood films or on Broadway and radio. The blues and novelty songs that came from the road shows to race records, as Paul Oliver observes, were comments of life and their fantasy heroes, coon figures, animal parallels, and oblique satirical references both amused and helped build racial confidence. Excuse me. The sale of Henry's Pace, Black Swan's company, to Paramount Records in 1924 probably altered the course of the race records more than historians care to admit. With Black Swan's demise, despite the continued presence of influential blacks such as Perry Bradford, the race record industry was almost exclusively controlled by whites. It probably still is. Internal censorship through selection of artists recorded, and songs released undoubtedly reflected the biases of the owners, which still does. Moreover, despite the sense of freedom black artists may have felt knowing the records were destined for the black audience, the reluctance to inhabitually air incendiary lyrics in such a public forum obviously detoured expression of the full range of humorous sentiments in African American song. Overall, however, race recordings marked the beginning of a black recording tradition featuring comic lyrics and routines that lasted through the 50s. When the genre was renamed rhythm and blues, or R&B, and on to the 90s and the emergence of rap. During that time, in addition to the raft of recordings made by blues singers and musicians, comedians such as Scatman Crothers, Pigmeat Markham, Dusty Fletcher, and Red Fox have recorded comic songs steeped in the blues or rhythm and blues tradition. During the 30s, Cab Calloway's effervescent style and combination of scatting and humorous lyrics dominated with such songs as Minnie the Moocher. Fats Waller, who had written Flat Tire Papa, Mama's Gonna Give Him Air in the 20s, also recorded Your Feet's Too Big. She likes your lovin', she likes your rig, but old man, them things is too big. Shit. Oh, your feet is too big. She likes your loving. She likes your rig. But old man, them things is too big. In 1939, the recording ended with Waller's famous quip. Your pedal extremities really are obnoxious. One never knows, do one. By the 40s, Louis Jordan had become America's most popular black recording artist, largely due to the release of a large list of humorous rhythm and blues songs such as Caledonia, Is You Is, or Is You Ain't My Baby, and Ain't Nobody Here But Us Chickens. In another of his hits, Honey Child, his amorous interest is described as having one brown eye and the other blue. She got false hair and a teeth or two. And beware, which enumerated ploys used by women intent on matrimony warned. If she used if she's used to caviar, and fine silk. And when she's out with you, she wants a hot dog and malted milk. Watch out. Beware, brother, beware. The ballyhoo, created by the release of the Open Door Richard in the late 40s. Hold on, let me see what that is. Let's see what ballyhoo. Devin! What's up, Devin? Let me see what, ballyhoo. Let's see if we can look up that word. Ballyhoo. 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 I think it's something. Let me see. Ballyhoo. 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 A fuss.
Ballyhoo.
Ballyhoo. A fuss. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff, Devin. It's a lot of stuff that, in reading this that reminds me of things. Some stuff it'd be like on the tip of my tongue. I know I've heard it. And I know I heard that song, that Caledonia. Is you is or is you ain't my baby. I know I've heard that one before. Man, let's keep going. The ballyhoo, or the fuss, extravagant publicity, or a fuss. After all the ballyhoo, the film was a flop. The fuss created by the release, or the extravagant publicity created by the release, or the ballyhoo created by the release of the Open Door Richard in the late 40s, was a sure sign of the growing popularity of comic rhythm and blues songs. In 1946, Jack McVeigh took a comedy routine popularized by Dusty Fletcher, set it to music, and released the first recording of the song. By the time Fletcher released his own version in 1947, according to Jim O'Neill, editor of Living Blues magazine, the Richard craze had swept the nation, and the title had become a catchphrase for national radio personalities, including Bob Hope, Jim Durant, Bing Crosby, and Phil Harris. In 1986, an English publication, Rhythm and Blues, published a list of over 24 recorded versions of the Open Door Richard, ranging from 1947 covers by Count Basie and Louis Jordan to 50s rock and roll renditions cut at Sun Records in Memphis. The recording's success marked one of the first times that a black comic stage routine was catapulted to national prominence. Publicity arising from disputes over creative rights, McVeigh, sound like zero, Joseph McVeigh, McVeigh was finally assigned rights to the music, and along with John Spider Bruce Mason, the originator of the routine, Fletcher was credited with the lyrics, increased the song's popularity. It also opened the door for Fletcher's stalling stage career and subsequently allowed him to record other novelty songs. On the Richard release, Fletcher, portraying a drunk who has been locked out of his apartment, delivers his comic monologue over a bluesy track featuring jazz man George Treadwell, Dickie Wells, Big Nick Nicholas, Jimmy Jones, and Al McKibben, and trades quips with an irate neighbor and a policeman. He don't want to open the door for me, and I owes just as much rent up here as he do. I don't care. I'ma move Saturday anyway. This old woman, she charging too much rent, $3 a month. I got the nerve to be mad because we's 11 months in the rear. Why is she coming asking me this morning? She say, when you boys gonna give me some of my back rent? So Just told her she lucky if she get any front rent out of me. Fletcher followed The Open Door Richard single with several other comic releases in 1947. Mad Hour, for instance, finds Fletcher still inebriated but stirring up comic havoc inside a bar. On his cut, he is accompanied by a jazz group that includes Dickie Wells, Bob Johnson, Bub Johnson, and Hot Lips Page. In addition to the comic pattern, Fletcher belts out some gravel voice blues lyrics and makes impromptu comments about the man. Comedy, however, was the focus. "Hey, bartender," Fletcher shouts. "Hey, who is them pretty looking girls over there? Give them pretty little girls a drink. What you want to drink over there, baby?" When the woman requests a scotch and soda, Fletcher quips, "They must have rehearsed that. A scotch and soda? Ain't this a shame? Give them old chicks a glass of beer and put 2 straws in the glass." The 40s produced a raft of tunes with comic overtones, but such groups as the Trenners, Go Go Go, and Rag Mop, and such performers as Slim Gillard, whose jazzy vocals were heard on Cement Mixer and other songs. Even Red Fox, who became turning exclusively to humor, was a musician and vocalist, released some comic blues recordings with Kenny Watts and his jumping buddies on the Savoy label. And by the beginning of the next decade, Fox recorded his first comedy album for Dudo Records. During the early 50s, rhythm and blues began invading the popular charts. Lloyd Price released, among other tunes, Lordy Miss Claudy and later Stagger Lee, which was based on a popular black folk ballad. In addition, the Coaster had emerged as the premier novelty artist in black music. They were best known for later songs such as Searching, Charlie Brown, and Yakety Yak. I wonder if that's that. Yakety Yak, Don't Come Back. Man, I would love to hear that Red Fox album. I would love to hear it. Yakety Yak, which made the top 10 on the R&B charts. But they were even funnier on tunes such as Smokey Joe's Cafe, Down in Mexico, and Shopping for Clothes, which received scant notice outside the black community. The last featured a slow blues riff, King Curtis on tenor sax, and doo-wop background over which a dialect exchange between the salesman and a prospective customer was heard. "Them buttons are solid gold. You made a deal, sold. That collar's pure camel hair, and you can just set that right down in that chair." After a credit check, the deal falls through. The customer leaves groaning, pure herringbone, as the clerk chides. But that's a suit you'll never own. Race records seldom explored the aggressively ironic side of African American humor, but because of prevailing assumptions about the nature of black life, more license was given to expression of suggestive erotic metaphors and other subjects that were taboo on mainstream records. The recordings therefore gained a reputation as being somewhat unsavory or low down, and to that extent reaffirmed an expression of black humor and music shared by whites and middle-class Negroes. Now, race records flourished during the 20s and, after a decline during the Depression, reemerged as a significant musical force in the 40s and 50s with the ascendancy of rhythm and blues. The process, however, was long and protracted. Even instrumental music, an abstract, nonverbal idiom, encountered considerable resistance. Critics denounced both the music and the hot dances that accompanied it, claiming that the uninhibited revelry it encouraged would undermine mainstream morality. The implicit sexual overtones of the dance associated with syncopated music were always in conflict with the central tenets of the Protestant ethic. Yet, as the Harlem Renaissance and upsurge of the Negrophilia during the 20s indicate, that erotic component is precisely what drew whites to Harlem and other black urban centers. In music, black, white, and blue, the musician and sociologist Ortiz M. Walton notes that whites attracted to black music are somewhat like the child who yearns to experience what is taboo by his own culture, and offers a passage from Herman Hesse's Steppenwolf as an example. From a dance hall there met me as I passed by the strains of lively jazz music, hot and raw as the steam of raw flesh. I stopped a moment. This kind of music, much as I detested it, had always had a secret charm for me. It was repugnant to me, and yet 10 times preferable to all the academic music of the day. Hesse's European narrator hero goes on to equate the music with savage gravity, honest sensuality, and childlike happiness that he felt was unblushingly Negroid. There was something of this Negro in it. But despite the allure of black music, an influence on the lives of white Americans was initially considered an ephemeral, let's see what it is, ephemeral, 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 ephemeral. It was considered an ephemeral diversion, one from which the addicted could easily withdraw without changing their views of blacks or segregated society. Ephemeral. What is ephemeral? Let's see. EPH, ephemeral, ephemeral. Ephemeral, ephemeral, lasting for a short time. But despite the allure of black music, its influence on the lives of white Americans was initially considered a lasting for a short time diversion, an ephemeral, an ephemeral diversion, ephemeral, lasting for a very short time. Them boys was getting addicted to that nigga music. One from which the addicted could easily withdraw without changing their view of blacks or segregated society. Usually, music did little to change societal images or establish social identities, and particularly since the lyric of most popular tunes were written by whites and reflected the sentiments of the dominant culture, the symbiotic process of absorption, feedback, and alteration went on virtually unabated. Now, grittier, more down-to-earth lyrics written by blacks, rural and urban blues, for example, were usually confined to race records, which were often banned from radio and ignored in respectable mainstream outlets before the mid-20th century. Concern over black music's effect on society was usually confined to disputes about the relative merits of rhythm versus harmony and melody, or questions of good and bad taste. On occasion, racial and social issues were brought to the forefront. And in 1954, for instance, an article in Variety proposed that the most astonishing thing about the current craze for rhythm and blues records and their accompanying lyrics is that it is or was ever permitted to happen. Their lyrical concoctions belong in the dim-lit honky-tonks and should never be heard on the air. And in 1956, a Newsweek story about the self-appointed leader of the North Alabama Citizens Council reported, Individual councils have formed action committees to call on owners of establishments with rock and roll music in their jukeboxes, he said. We also intend to see the people who sponsor the music and the people who promote the Negro bands for teenagers. Rock and roll music, he said, is the basic beat of Negroes. It appeals to the very base of man, brings out the base in man, and brings out the animalism and vulgarity. And look where rock and roll is today. Yep. Despite the criticism, however, black music, jazz, blues, and rhythm and blues continued its gradual ascent. Ultimately, these records had an incredible impact on America's mainstream popular music. By the late 50s, white performers were commonly making so called cover releases, and, as pointed out in Chapter 5, by the 60s, the rhythms of former race records had been appropriated as rock and roll and were quickly beginning to define America's popular music. Now, authentic African American comedy was not as easily assimilated. When black music was altered for consumption in America's mainstream culture, its so called primitive aspects were toned down, in effect, giving it a more polite European veneer. The adaptations of black music popularized by mainstream interpreters from Stephen Foster, John Philip Sousa, Paul Whiteman, and George Gershwin to Pat Boone, Chubby Checker, Elvis Presley, and Vanilla Ice were essentially more sanitized and whitewashed versions of the source material. Once the music was accepted, black musicians worked at revising the process of gentrification, replacing and reaffirming the music's earthier, funkier, and more rhythmical folk elements. In comedy, mainstream's distortion functions in an opposite manner. Although its sexual overtones and graphic language were eliminated, popular adaptations of African American humor often involved broadening the comedy or amplifying and ridiculing the assumed primitive characteristics of Negroes. The task of black comedians was to replace derisive comic stereotypes with authentic comic modes that, while reaffirming folks' origins, revealed the double-edged meanings and subtle ironic twist of the humor. Moreover, unlike music, comedy is seldom neutral. It nearly always involves either the belittling or extolling of the humorous subject and, simultaneously, a corresponding detracting and commending of the comic source. For turn of the century black performers, comedy entailed the introducing of reasoned perceptions and satirical overtones that, instead of reaffirming minstrelsy's objecting self-effacing projection of black life, mirrored often concealed, less accommodating black attitudes. Essentially, it meant replacing minstrelsy's externally imposed stage image of naive ineptitude or buffoonery with a comic presence that reflected deliberate humor created within a black community. This shift in the humorous presentation of the stage Negro was considered a threat, an attack on America's underlying belief in white supremacy. In fact, it did touch on the very center of white-black relations in America, for it challenged an assumption America had made about blacks that was old as slavery. Obviously, the emergence of more assertive black comedy presented a dilemma that would not be quickly or painlessly resolved. And that was the end of section 1 of chapter 8. We made it through. I'll say about 45 minutes, a little over 49, 50 minutes, man. We made it through. Stumbled across some words, but we pushed through it one word at a time, one page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time, man, until we get this book all the way down. And we're always looking for what we can learn and grow from within whatever we have read. Definitely the stuff by Red Fox, which is closer to my time frame. Definitely somebody I remember. Definitely somebody I watched and still watch as of today. Because I still check out Sanford and Son, and he did his thing in the movie with Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy, and all them other boys. Harlem Nights. He did his thing also in Harlem Nights. So Red Fox is definitely somebody that I grew up kind of on, but I didn't know that he had a comedy album, with comedy songs or comedic songs. So that would definitely be something to check out. As my boy Devin said, he used to hear his pawpaw, listen to those things. I bet it was a thing to hear. Definitely something I want to hear. So next time, man. Man, I didn't really feel like reading tonight. I'm honestly, man, I didn't feel like it. But we pushed through it. I was like, I got to get up there and read. So we pushed through it, and we are on the downslope, man. We are on the downslope of the book. Look at this big ass thing, Devin. Look at that, man. We got less to go through than what we have read. At least that's what it looked like to me. It looks like we have less to go through than what we have read. So we're almost there on this big ass book. Yeah, I made it through. I pushed through. I knew it was gonna be about an hour, about 45 minutes to an hour read. The next section, man, is a doozy. The next section probably gonna be a 2-hour read. So we'll try to come back tomorrow a little earlier. We got all that is section 2. And we're gonna try to push through section 2. I should feel better about reading tomorrow. But I'm glad we got it out the way, man. I'm glad we got it out the way. And that was chapter 8, Race Records and Black Films of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. History of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. And we are moving into my time period. So it's beginning to, I'm starting to laugh a little more because it's beginning to be some stuff that I know. Some stuff that, I find funny for sure. And I hope that it's many, many, many more funny things, throughout the book as we start getting into the latter stages towards the Chris Rock. I think we have done past the slavery stuff, but you can still see in the music, because the comedy, even though it's a book about comedy, it does talk a lot about the music industry and the different mediums that the entertainment had, like radio or the minstrelsy, the vaudevilles, the Broadway stages, the variety shows, which then turned into the radio shows, and then in turn turned into the television shows. And now you actually have, record companies who are jacking nigga music and putting it out for the white audiences because they see the infectious effect that the music has on people, the addictive effect, the effect of making a person or making people, whether people of all races, creeds, colors, whatever, get up and move and make you want to move, and they can't stop it. So all they see is dollar signs behind that. So they put out what they want to put out, how they want to put out. They back who they want to back. So it's always going to be, you could have a good sound, you could have a good thing that people like, but if it doesn't fit into what the owners want to put out, or that's why you got all this drill music and all this stuff, is that's what the owners want to put out. They don't want to put out stuff that shows like they were trying to do at this time in the book, to show an alternative image, of the people or of the blacks, African Americans in this book. You know, so it's still an image that's being portrayed. It's still the cooning and buffooning imagery. You know, that the burlesque imagery, the vulgar imagery and caricatures that are still being allowed and still being pushed, the sambos that are still being pushed to for the dollar, man, for the dollar. You know, that's why at one point in time they were saying we need to take over our own images, like in movies and stuff, so we can portray ourselves how we want to be portrayed. You know, it'll be the same thing. You should only buy, if we want to look at ourselves in a good light and in a good way, man, we should only be uh, supporting the positive things. Yeah, the negative is there, but you don't have to support the negative. You don't have to buy, stuff that's talking about killing your people, or you don't have to root for that shit. You don't have to fill up the rows of the stadiums when the concerts are had. You know, the more money you spend, or the more money that is spent in these places, it gives the owners, which are of another color, creed, culture, the incentive to keep doing the shit that has always worked. As the statement says, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So to them, the way they've been running things and the system that they have set up was not broken. It's not broken. It's still making them money, and it can still use the same old tactics over and over again, because people don't really, one, they don't read for real, people really don't read for real or take the time to really get into certain things, so they get the wool pulled over their eyes. And I may have been a, a victim, a victim of the wool being pulled over my eyes, but a lot of times that's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault because I should have saw it coming. I should have been more aware of certain things. So, but you live, you learn, you make the adjustments, and you try to do better. And that's what reading these books is trying to do, to see what we can learn and grow from, so we can adjust ourselves, our lives, our positions, move forward, grow in mind, body, and soul, spiritually, physically, all the above. And maybe we can come to, hey, some point. It's not gonna be all of us, but maybe, hey, is you? What about you? Maybe you could change your life. Maybe just you changing your life can affect many others that's around you. You doing better for yourself may cause a person to say, well, shit, if he could do it, I know I can do it. That nigga did it. Oh, I know I can do it. Even if they hating on you, if they say it like that, still, if they look at it, man, it's still something. If he could do it, I know I can do it. And maybe they'll try. Just because they hate, they'll try to see if they can do it. And in turn, they done better themselves and may become a better person for it. But hey, that once again, that was the start of chapter 8, section 1 of On the Real Side by Mr. Mel Watkins. Man, it's turned out to be a very informative book. We didn't have a lot of words to look up today, which I'm grateful for, like 2 or 3, something like that. But hey, we can push through it. We're going to keep pushing through it. Keep pushing through it. And until next time, man. SHILO out. SHILO is out. So I hope y'all have a wonderful night. Hey, for those who come in later, man, like, comment, tell your people. Definitely like and comment. Let me know if it's a book that you might think interesting. Hey, leave a comment so I can know and I can try to check it out. I'll keep pushing. I'll keep looking for other books. I definitely want to get into some books on leadership, and so we can throw that in the mix and just keep growing and going. So let's keep pushing. I'm almost to 600 subscribers. Let's keep pushing till we get to 1,000 now, man. So, hey, shalom. Good night, Matt. Good night. Thank you for stopping in, man. Thank you for stopping in. Yeah, if you don't mind, like the stream, man. Put a like up there. It'll help the algorithm, as they say. Yeah, but till next time, man. This has been Reading with SHILO. SHILO out. Shalom, D. Shalom, Devin.